My name is Stacey Shiflett. I'm the pastor of Calvary Baptist Church here in Dundalk, Maryland, right on the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland. Been here, just started our 10th year, just celebrated 9 years in this mission field where we are now of Baltimore. We've got 400,000 people in a 7-mile radius of our church.
Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Jason Mann. This podcast is the Independent Baptist Friends Fellowship meeting, and it's a time to interview different pastors and missionaries to get to know them, to get to know what the Lord is doing through their ministries. Today, I'm excited to have Pastor Stacey Shiflett with us, and as we go through, he'll explain how the Lord has used him, and I have several questions I would like to ask him, and I look forward to having him on the podcast again if he's willing to come back. I definitely enjoyed the time. Brad Lowry, missionary in Croatia, is a co-host with me today. I'm excited to have him with me as always. So let's dive in without further ado.
We couldn't reach them all in 100 lifetimes.
Wow. Well, amen. How many churches are in the area?
You know, there's a couple on the outskirts of the city. There's a desperate need for more churches in the city. If we're gonna visit a church that believes a lot like us, there's a new church plant just getting started, but there's a desperate need in Baltimore in Maryland really, but in Baltimore, a population of about 600,000 people. We could use 10 or 15 more good solid Baptist churches up here. I promise
you. I don't know where there is not a need for more. I'm in the DFW area. There's about 300, but I don't think it's enough.
Wow.
So, yes, sir.
Preacher, do you think that's because of the reputation that Baltimore has, or if there's a history there as far as churches that were in existence before but have folded, or can you speak to that at all?
Well, I know every time I go back down south, which is where I'm from, I was born and raised in Georgia. And of course, my parents were missionaries. So I lived all over the world. We were missionaries in South Africa for a while, pastored in Greenville, South Carolina for a number of years. So whenever I go back down south, there is a pretty strong stigma. A lot of the guys down there are still fighting the Civil War. And so they think we're up north, think we're a bunch of Yankees up here, which we're not. I don't have a single Yankee in my church, believe it or not. We're about 45 minutes below the Mason-Dixon line, but we don't get any credit for that. There's just a lot of northern, southern feelings that comes into play. I'm 8 hours from Charlotte. But when you're down there, they act like you went to Mars when you came to Maryland. It's just so far from where many of them are used to traveling. That and probably the crime. The west side of Baltimore is very dangerous. We have the highest murder rate per capita in the United States. It's higher than Chicago, higher than New York for the population. But on this side of Baltimore, we don't really have those problems. It's a different world. I can drive 30 minutes and really be in a war zone. But I think that probably comes into play. Baltimore's very liberal. Maryland's not. Maryland's actually very conservative, but the cities are very liberal. And so we get a bad reputation for that. But I'm just going to be honest with you, brother. The same reason why I think church planners are not coming up here. It's the same reason why they're not going to a lot of places around the world. They just, they're outside of their comfort zone, and there's fear of the unknown. And there just seems to be a lack of people that want to, go somewhere where there's a greater need. They'd rather be close enough to mom and them so they can drop the kids off and go out on a date. That's a lot of it. Maybe I'm being unfair. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think the evidence is clear. There's not men surrendering as there needs to be because the need is not met. So I think dropping off to mom is a good thing to say.
Well, there's a lot of preachers piling up in churches, and they're, you talk to them, they say, yeah, I'm just waiting for the Lord to open the door.
Yeah.
And I say, get your hands out of your pocket and turn a doorknob. There's needs everywhere. Of course, all
Yeah,
over the
true.
United States, there's needs. Brother Sykes has done a phenomenal work with that Be Salt ministry, and he has laid out very clearly huge pockets, even in the United States, where there's cities of 100,000 plus people and no good, solid independent Baptist church.
Mhm.
And yet we've got guys that are wanting to take a church, but they want to stay in the same house they grew up in, and they
Mhm.
don't want to move outside their zip code. And I don't understand that. We're soldiers in the Army. We get orders from headquarters, we go. But
Yes.
there's just I think there's not enough preachers and pastors preaching to their preacher boys and preacher men to surrender to do whatever. And
Mhm.
the need's not the problem. There's needs everywhere, like you said, all
Yeah.
around the world, even in the United States. But a lot of folks are just content to stay around the house. And
Mhm.
I know of pastors that have pastored their entire career and never moved from their house. I mean, they've pastored 2 or 3 churches within driving distance of where they live. And I just thought, how does that work out?
Mhm.
God moved me
Yeah.
clear to Africa. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so, I don't want to be a jerk, but I think a lot of
Mhm.
people just really have kind of limited their options on what they want to do for God. And like you said, that's evident.
Mhm. I had lunch with one pastor, and he said, "Brother man, I don't have missionaries preach for me. I have 8 preachers in my church. I don't need preachers." And I was like, man. Later, he said, "What do you need?" I said, "We need men to preach. Send some of those out. Get rid of them. You don't need that many. You can't have 8 messages at one time." But that's another conversation too. So, real quick, tell us about the movie that you were in, and how is that doing? How's the reports of that? That was an excellent movie. I really enjoyed it, and my brother Caleb did an awesome job at editing it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so for those that don't know what we're talking about, Brother Caleb Garraway, dear friend of mine, approached me about 5 years ago and had the idea of doing a small little he said he wanted to do like a 7, 8, 9 minute little promo video for his new track. And he said, I want to do some scenes in Baltimore, kind of a homeless guy, and because the track was about hope. One thing led to another, and we got together and got to talking, and next thing you know, he's wanting to do a 20, 30 minutes. Let's just let it breathe. Let's just shoot some footage and let it breathe, and let's just do a little short video about a veteran coming off the battlefield and living on the streets and addictions and everything. And next thing you know, he's wanting to do a full feature 90-minute film. So we ended up shooting about 2 weeks of footage all around Baltimore, and he said there was going to be a suicide scene in there, and there was going to be just a lot of drugs and alcohol and domestic violence and all these things. And he said, how far are you prepared to go to do this? And I said, well, I'll do everything except pull the trigger. So I didn't know when I signed up for it what all we would end up doing, but then after much prayer and just getting into it, he decided just to cut it back to about a 50-minute film. If he felt like the story moved a little bit better if he condensed it. So to make a long story short, we shot that footage 5 years ago, and he was just been working on it around other projects. And then last year he called me and he said, okay, I'm fixing to hunker down. I'm going to make this a priority. We're going to get this done. And so I was pleased. I was thrilled with how it turned out. He obviously has a lot of skills when it comes to the video and the
Yeah.
cinematography part of it. I ended up being the main character. My wife played my wife in the film. My kids were in the film. So quite a few of our church members and staff members were in it. We shot a lot of the footage here at the church, in and around the church, in and around the city of Baltimore. And he asked me to help him, and me and him and Katie worked on the script together. And then I ended up doing the narration here at the church. And it was a first time for me. Somebody had told me the other day, they said, you can now add acting to your resume. I said, I was a preacher's kid. I said, I learned to act when I was a kid. What you talking about? My dad would say, we're going over to the people's house. You act like you got some sense. And so, but no, I learned to act when I was a kid. But no, this really was an interesting project. And the reports are pouring in. There's been well over 1,000 people that have reached out to Brother Caleb through the website, and the reports of people getting saved. So last count has been over 1,000. But if you go to redeeminghope.com, There's a link to the film, as well as also a feedback form. People can go in there and let us know if they got saved, and we can get back in touch with them, try to find them a good church in their area. So yeah, the Lord's using it. It's been shown all around the world, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, I've been door knocking since I was 5. That's where I got my love of coffee, because you got coffee, donuts, and then you just went around door knocking with your dad, And the suicide scene with the guy, quote unquote, randomly door knocking, and came across, I forget the actor's name, but came across him. And
that was Brother Garraway's dad. I don't know if you knew that or not. And he passed away.
Really?
He passed away a year after we shot that footage.
Oh, that's special.
He's in heaven. Yeah. And Brother Caleb dedicated the film to him.
Okay.
Yeah, but in real life, he only got called to preach in his 50s. Wow. And then we just became a faithful soul winner and went around to churches and did soul winning classes and seminars. And God used him in an amazing way in his later years. But Brother Garraway's daddy being in the film was another huge personal. Yeah.
That's awesome. You never know what's behind the door when you knock on it. So it was just good to see, just faithful obedience.
Yeah.
That's very much required. You write a lot of books. How many books have you published?
I don't know. Close to 20, I think. I've lost count. I'm not. I don't keep up with it.
Yeah, I read a few of them, and I enjoy them. You're a good author, good writer. There's a need, I believe, for more books from good, solid, doctrinal, King James, the right stand preachers and all that. Can you speak into that a little bit? And how do you find time? What subjects? Things of that nature?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, I was an avid reader as a kid. A lot of kids would be outside playing. I'd be reading. And they would be reading Archie comics, and I was reading the Newsweek and Time magazine, cutting pictures of Ronald Reagan out and making scrapbooks when I was 10, 11 years old. 1984. I was born in 72, so I'd have been 11 years old, I guess, 12 years old. And I was reading, I knew everything about Ronald Reagan's cabinet. I could tell you about the Iran-Contra scandal. I was keeping up with Oliver North. I mean, it was nuts. I look back now, I think I was just a freak of nature as a kid. But I read biographies and autobiographies and world leaders, politicians, presidents, generals. I was fascinated with leadership as a kid, and I'd go in the bookstore, or not bookstore, the library, and I'd check out a big, huge stack of books of generals, and it'd be everything from George Washington and Lincoln and Swamp Fox and General Patton to Benedict Arnold. I read about Stalin and I read about Churchill. As a boy, I read all those books, and I was fascinated with leadership, and I was fascinated with just history. And now, fast forward, I'm still very intrigued by political science. I have to be careful not to get too deep into it. But I'm right here 45 minutes above DC, and the Lord's opened up so many amazing doors. But my interest in reading and writing started as a child. I was a published author when I was 11 years old. I wrote an article and sent it to the newspaper, and they published it, not in the letter to the editor section, but in the actual newspaper as a column. Mm-hmm. And I just realized that the pen was mightier than the sword. I was fascinated by the sword and by the military, but also realized the power of the pen. And so, I started writing essays and stuff as a young man. My first book was right after we finished Deputation, Brother Man. The Lord blessed us with an amazing story of deputation. And I wrote a book called Deputation, been there, done that, loved every minute of it. We raised our support in 10 months. This was in 2000. We were going to South Africa, and God just stepped in and supernaturally helped us raise $4,000 a month support in 10 months. And I had a lot of missionaries saying, what am I doing wrong? I've been on deputation 3 or 4 years. I just can't get any traction. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote my first book trying to help missionaries raise support and avoid making some mistakes. That was actually an ebook forever. And then I published it a number of years ago, but it was the first book that I wrote. Then we got to South Africa, and I had so many conversations with people on the mission field. As y'all know, you deal with false doctrines, cults, so much confusion. And I would have these conversations, and I just found myself repeating myself. Every time I talked to somebody, I kept saying the same thing over and over. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write some books about some of these subjects and just have them on hand to give to them. And that was really a thing I did more or less to just save time. So in Africa, I wrote books on the deity of Christ, the charismatic movement, baptism, because we were dealing with Dutch Reformed people in South Africa, and they were, big into infant baptism and all that.
Mhm.
So a lot of the books that I have written in the earlier part of my ministry was just because I was answering so many of the same questions. I thought there's got to be a way to save time. So that's how that happened. And then one thing led to another, and I just started dealing with other topics. But I agree with you that we need more solid, independent, fundamental, King James, uh, Bible-based resources. And I got tired of recommending books to new converts and saying you got to just ignore the fact that the guy is a Calvinist, or he's using
Right.
the NIV, spit out the bones, and we just assume people can or know how to spit the bones out. So I encourage pastors to write. It does take a lot of time. And I think that's the reason why a lot of guys don't do it, is they just don't take the time. I'm not going to say they don't have the time. We all have 24 hours in a day. It's just what you choose to do with it. But the writing is important. I can give some pointers on some ways that it's make it easier. But at the end of the day, you still have to just, knuckle down and say, I'm going to do this. Some of my books are sermon series that I preach. I did one on stewardship. The book's called Much is Given. Took a 7-message series. It might have been 5, 6, 7. I can't remember how many messages on stewardship. Got them transcribed. That was my rough draft. You take the transcription of your message that's on CD or YouTube or whatever, and you can find people that will transcribe it for you.
Okay.
That's your rough draft. That's what you start with. Okay, that's not your finished product at all. But that's where you start. Then you go in and start cleaning it up and editing it, polishing it, and doing all that. My book on stewardship was a series. The book on the anatomy of apostasy was a 7-message series. I'm thinking of some others that I've done. The one on sanctification. So you can transcribe messages, and then you can use them have them on your computer, and then go in there and start cleaning them up. And that saves a little bit of time. But then I have the Notes and Nuggets series. I'm working on volume 5 now. I've got 4 volumes of Notes and Nuggets, and those are just my preaching notes and outlines that I take to the pulpit. And each book is about 600 pages. So between the 4 volumes is about 2,400 pages. That's really about a year and 3, 4, 5 months of preaching. About every year to 3 or 4 or 5 months, I will have enough messages to do another volume. And I plan on just continuing to do that. And people use them for family devotion. Sunday school teachers use them. Unfortunately, some preachers use them so they don't have to study, because they can just really just print it out and get up there from the pulpit and read it. And some do. I'm not joking. Some do, which I think is unethical. But that I have my messages available on our church website anyway, because I want my people to have them. Well, actually, it's not on our church website anymore. They're on Sherwood Publications. But after I preach a message, I'll upload my outline that I took to the pulpit, and our church members can go and download it and look at all the cross references and my comments, illustrations, and whatever. So that's really how that started, was having it for our church members. And then now I've got missionaries and pastors around the world that are using them to some extent. So it does take time. It does take time. It requires a lot of discipline. But I'm going to tell you where God really burned into my heart the need for books and the importance of books, Brother Man. And that is this. When I was a missionary in South Africa, I realized I can start a church, and in a few years, that thing can just fall apart for whatever reason. I can train a pastor. I can train a preacher boy, and he can become disqualified or get out of the ministry. But when I write a book, that thing is going to say the same thing 50 years from now as it says today. And I just realized that if you want to have a long-term legacy and leave something behind, write books. I walk in my library, I got books in there by Oliver B. Green, Dr. Seitler, and Ivor Powell, and on and on and on I could go. And those men are dead, but being dead, they still speak, through those books. And so I encourage men to do it. If you've got the ability and the know-how and the desire, do it. We need them.
You mentioned that you could give some tips or some insights on getting started in writing. Do you have, like, a 1-page or even a short booklet on how does, we're talking about the need for more material, but do you have anything already put together that you can make available, maybe through a link that we can give so that people can know how do you get started in that process?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I just got a phone call Monday from a friend of mine that I have used in the past to do transcribing and editing. And he is coming out with a little brochure slash booklet on how to become an author. Okay. And he's dealing with all these little things. I just talked to him this morning, and I don't know when it'll be out, but it'll be out shortly because he asked me to just write a couple of sentences of a recommendation. My daughter also does proofreading and editing and transcribing. She's a missionary's wife in the Philippines, and she does it as she gets time. So he's working on that. But one of the things that I think is a discouragement to a lot of people is they think, oh man, it's just so expensive. It's not anymore. Okay. I publish through Amazon Kindle. You can pull it up on just Google Kindle Amazon Publishing. And there is a full-blown tutorial on everything. How to start a book, how you can download the templates to your Word documents. It's got the margins figured out based on how many pages your book is. It tells you all this. I mean, it's like publishing for dummies. And it's Kindle, Amazon. The point is, it doesn't cost a dime. I can upload a 600-page notes and nuggets book. I design my cover, obviously, or you can pay somebody to do it. They have templates for that as well. That design your cover and your book, lay it out and everything, and upload that PDF to Amazon. And in 24 hours, there's a live link on Amazon. People can be buying your book, and it costs you zero. Okay. They make money off of it. You make money off of it. And they'll ship it. They'll print the things on demand and ship them out. You don't have to touch them. I just got a royalty check yesterday. I looked at it. I was like blown away about how many people are buying books online from Amazon. I mean, blown away. Direct deposit straight into your account every single month. And of course, I don't do it for the money. Never have done it for the money. I give so many books away and I help so many people. I don't care about the money. But a lot of people don't publish because they think it's going to cost so much. Well, a lot of these publishing companies require like a minimum order. You write a book, say it's a 150-page book on whatever. They say you got to order a minimum of 500 books, and then it ends up costing you like $2,500 out of pocket. Well, nobody's got that. Amazon, no money out of pocket. Published author in 24 hours. It's a no-brainer.
And you really can't mess up because their algorithms won't let you mess up if you get something wrong or formatting or anything. It kicks it back and says, no, you did it wrong, fix it.
Right.
So it's right.
Exactly.
That's great. How long have you been in ministry?
Surrendered to preach in 93, July of 93, just celebrated 30 years of preaching. I was in Pensacola Christian College studying business administration and computer science, came home for the summer, went to Brother Sammy Allen's camp, Faith Baptist camp in Resaca, Georgia. Dr. Sam Davison was preaching on a Thursday in their June camp meeting, preached a message on surrender. And I went to the altar. I surrendered to preach, wrestled with God, just waited for confirmation, and then announced my call to preach July the 15th, about 3 weeks later, and preached my first message on that very next day. I told my pastor on a Saturday, told my parents on a Saturday, and he had me preach on that next Sunday night. And my first message is actually on my YouTube channel. And I preached out of the last couple of verses of Ecclesiastes. Let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. So that was July of 93 and just celebrated 30 years of preaching, brother.
Amen. Yeah. Speak to encouragement and loneliness in the ministry.
Loneliness.
How do you stay encouraged and how do you avoid being lonely?
Does that happen? Does people get lonely?
I haven't met a preacher that doesn't.
I'm being sarcastic. We were in South Africa from March 2001 to 2006, five and a half years total. We were there in a city of 1 million people. Our closest fellowship was about 4.5 hours away. We had to drive up to Johannesburg. There were some American missionaries up there. So, yeah, I know about loneliness. I know about working by yourself. I know about having to do everything. When we started the church, I led the piano. I played the piano, led the singing from the piano bench, would get up, go around, make announcements, go back, sit down, play the piano, lead the singing. Then I'd preach, and then we couldn't give an invitation because I didn't have anybody to deal with anybody and play a piano. It was just nobody take up the offerings. I know what it's like doing everything, starting out that way, and going out soul winning by myself. My wife had 3 little kids at home, and I'd doing everything by myself. Going up and down streets with backpacks, passing out literature, witnessing to people. Loved it, but yes, begged for help. Every prayer letter, begging for help. I need help. Need help. Need help. Finally, a family came to help us, and we like to kill one another. They end up going 8 hours away and doing their own thing because we couldn't work together. Yeah, all the stories. Yeah, I know. But the loneliness for us was we kind of rectified that. We invested in our people. We would have our people over. Um, one of the major problems that I see with Americans is they think they have to have fellowship with other Americans. And some of our greatest fellowship was with the people in our church. We just had them over, and they just be over there and eat with us and do stuff. And of course, my wife and I, your marriage gets closer. It should. I hope it does. Spend time with your kids, and as a family. I got to the place where as long as I had my family and my church people, I was good. And anything above that was just a bonus. Uh, I know Americans that talk about being by themselves all the time. They got a church, they got a nucleus, they've got new converts, but it's almost as if they don't count them as being valid fellowship. And I think that's a mistake. We loved them. They became like family to us. The young people were like our kids. The young married couples, we just poured ourselves into them. The older people, we just treat them like our parents. You just adopt people and you make it work. Obviously, it's not the same as celebrating 4th of July with other Americans around the grill cooking out steak. In South Africa, it was cold in July and hot in December. So everybody was freezing for the 4th of July, and at Christmas, they all went to the beach. It was weird. The seasons were opposite. And that'll mess with you a little bit, mess with your mind, as Americans. We would go up to Joburg and celebrate Thanksgiving with some Americans. We'd go up there and have Thanksgiving meal with them. But to be honest with you, we really didn't experience the loneliness that a lot of missionaries do because we just wouldn't let ourselves. My wife and I made a decision on deputation, and I deal with this in my deputation book. Paul said, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. And we started that deliberately channeling our thought patterns while we were on deputation, because verse 7 of Philippians 4 says, the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And then the next verse says, whatsoever things are lovely, honest, pure, lovely, good report, think on these things. We learned that that our thought patterns could prevent us from going down into this rabbit hole of criticism, culture shock, loneliness. We just didn't allow ourselves to go there. The first couple of churches we went to on deputation, we would get in the van, go down the road, and I'd be like, wow, did you see that? Man, can you believe that? Wow. Did you see what that woman had on the front row of the choir? How in the world is that allowed? And the pastor's wife was so rude. We did that at like 2 or 3 services. And then I was like, stop, time out. We ain't doing this. I'm not leaving every church being critical and analytical. I'm not going to join the church. I'm not trying to become a member. We're just trying to get support. And my wife and I made a deliberate choice. We said, we're not going to be critical of these churches. We're going to go in. You see it. I see it. We're not going to get in the van, talk about it going down the road. That's not what I want to do. And we deliberately prepared ourselves for deputation. So we had a great deputation experience because we started out with that mindset, number one. Well, guess what? We took it to the field with us. And we got over there. And my wife will tell you, I've said it from the pulpit, and my wife will verify what I'm fixing to tell you. 5.5 years in Africa, and we did not have culture shock because we did not sit around and talk about the dumb stuff, the crazy stuff, the insanity, the crime, the AIDS, you name it. We just didn't talk about it. We just focused on the good and the positive and trying to be a help and be a blessing. And it's amazing how much better you are spiritually and mentally if you can prepare and condition your mind to just not think about it. And people that sit around and talk about being lonely and we don't have no fellowship and 4th of July stinks because we don't have fireworks and friends over for a cookout, they're not helping themselves. They're making it worse, I think, by talking about it and dwelling on it. And if I had not been a missionary, I would not tell you what I'm telling you right now. But I've been there and I've done it, and I know it works. It does work.
When I was a pastor and we would have missionaries in, already vetted them before they ever come to the church, but just sitting across the table, over dinner or something as missionaries would come through, or talking to them on the phone, or visiting them on the field. One of the questions I always ask was, what is your greatest challenge that you face? By far, the number one answer was loneliness. That was by far the number one answer from across the board. But I think what you're saying is very true. And having been on both sides of the desk, I can see both sides of that aspect. Sometimes you're in places where where Brother Jason's going, there's not another missionary. We're in a capital city of 1 million people. There are no other missionaries within, hour and a half drive or so. So you just have to make those determinations and decisions. Sure, I think everybody, maybe you ride the roller coaster, you have good days and bad days, and some are worse than others, but you just have to make those decisions, like you say, and find your focus in the right thing.
Well, another thing too is different people have different ways of operating in their ministry and their philosophy and different gear. I was actually thinking about this morning, that passage of scripture about Abraham. I preached years ago on Abraham when he was sitting in the door of his tent, and those angels came up, and I want to find it because I've got them underlined in my Bible. So Abraham was, bumping 100. And the Bible says there was me and Cain in chapter 18. And, the Bible says in verse 6, he hastened into the tent. Verse number 7, he ran into the herd. And he hurried and he hastened and he ran and he hurried. And this man's bumping 100. And I preached a message on what gear are you in? Okay. And here he is, he's just all in, 100% full throttle. I'm gonna tell you how I dealt with loneliness in South Africa. I just stayed busy. If I felt like I needed to have a conversation, I'd go down and go in stores and businesses and ask for the owner, and I'd say, "Hey, I'm Stacey Shiflett. I'm an American. I'm a pastor here. You want to have a cup of coffee?" And I'd go in their office and kick back and talk to them for 2 hours over a cup of coffee, 2 or 3 cups of coffee, and build relationships and witness to them. And you know what? It's hard to be lonely if you're talking to people and you're dealing with people. If you're sitting at home browsing the internet and you're on Facebook, you get homesick, you miss everybody. But if you're just immersed in the ministry, brother, I was preaching 7, 8, 9, 10 times a week. I just had so many preaching places I'd go. I was preaching in the schools. I'd go in the university and preach. I had places at the YMCA. I had a tent. I'd take boxes and boxes of literature and go stand on the street corner and pass them out. And people would stand there and talk and you would engage. And by the time you get done doing that, you just want to go home. And all you really want to talk to is your wife and kids. So one of the things that I used to deal with loneliness was I stayed busy. And it worked. It worked. And I mean, it was just ministry from early morning to late at night, having people in our homes, Bible studies and whatnot. So I think maybe some of the people that struggle with loneliness, they might have too much free time on their hand. I'm just throwing that out. I didn't really deal with loneliness, even though I was the only one there, because I was so busy preaching and talking to people, dealing with people, sitting at the table with people, doing discipleship. I didn't get lonely, and that's how I dealt with it. And that's just how. And I deal with it today. If I get frustrated in the ministry, or if I get discouraged, well, guess what I do? I go find somebody to encourage. I invite somebody over to the house and start trying to be a blessing to them. And guess what that does? That takes that away. So that's just some practical experience that I've had.
That's good. How long were you in Africa?
We were only there 5.5 years. And then we came off the field and took a church in Greenville, South Carolina. But the 5.5 years that we were there, I started 2 separate churches, pastored both of them at the same time for about 1.5 years, which was a trip. And then I couldn't do it anymore. I just ended up combining the two. But, I was preaching somewhere just about every day, every night. And we had a tent ministry. We'd go put a tent up in the townships and preach every night for 2 weeks. We saw hundreds of people saved. Some of the stuff that I wrote, the discipleship stuff I wrote, was out of necessity for all the new converts. When I couldn't do one-on-one discipleship, it was just humanly impossible. And I know for some of y'all that are in Europe and some of these hard countries, it's hard to imagine having a tent meeting and 50 people getting saved in one night and having that overwhelming responsibility. How am I supposed to disciple these people? But for places like the Philippines or South America or in Africa, those are real problems that you struggle with. So I would write discipleship books and try to get them a Bible. We had a whole shipments of Bible coming in from Bearing Precious Seed, and we would give them those little Bibles with the little burgundy vinyl backs on them. And so I'd make sure the new converts all got a Bible and a discipleship book. And I felt like that was doing something. It was better than nothing. It was a horrible excuse as opposed to sitting down with them and doing discipleship. But I was one person, and they was getting saved by the hundreds. And sadly, brother, many of them had AIDS. I hate to say it, but many of them weren't going to live another year or 2 or 3. And that was just a sad, shocking reality, a stark reality in South Africa. They were dying like flies over there. So at least I had the consolation of knowing they got the gospel, got saved, and I put some literature in their hands. But you want to talk about pressure? There was pressure on me as a missionary to get people saved before they died, because 40% of South Africans have HIV. Yeah, think about it.
Is that still true today?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the witch doctors were telling all the young men that had AIDS that if they would be with, 70 virgins, 100 virgins, they could get rid of their AIDS. And so it was spreading like wildfire, just a satanic lie. And so these guys were just, I mean, the fornicating and promiscuity was insane over there. But trying to get people saved was a priority. And so I'd really, just to be honest with you, because of just the way I am, the way I'm geared, and as busy as I was, I didn't really struggle with loneliness as much as some missionaries do, though there were times when it was pretty real. And what I would do is I would just unplug. I'd tell my wife, pack a suitcase, we'd load the kids up, we'd go find, a bed and breakfast or a little tourist resort, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours away. It's take about 2 days, just spend time with the family and refresh ourselves and unplug it and go back and kind of get a fresh perspective and hit the ground running, like a reset. We did that often. A lot of people would say, preacher, you're doing too much. You need to make sure you spend time with your family. And I said, let me tell you something. As much as I love Africa, I'm not going to lose my family. I promise you, I'm going to spend time with them. And that's still true today. I spend plenty of time with my family. But I do think, I'm sorry.
I want to talk about that a little bit. Brother Brad, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I think that's, he's addressed that well. And I think just to reiterate what he said there at the end, it's important. I know a lot of veteran missionaries said, you have to make sure that you take that time to come apart and rest a while, be refreshed, be renewed, then get back in after it. And, some are very meticulous where it's almost, they put it on the schedule, every 90 days, they take 2 or 3 days and get away. If that works for them, that's great. But it is important to be able to do that and kind of have that opportunity to be refreshed and reset.
Yeah. And I know as a missionary, it's really hard to take a Sunday off in most cases, but I would have no problem on Monday, we would have, I think we had our midweek service on Thursday night. I'd get up on Monday morning and we would just bail. And I would just tell my wife, we're going to drive till we find somewhere, or she would find something online. And we would go and just pretend we were tourists for a couple of days and, and eat. And we'd eat well and eat out. And the kids would do stuff, play with them and just clear your head. I think a lot of missionaries don't realize the satanic oppression that's on top of everything else. In South Africa, it was insane. I mean, Bloemfontein was literally a satanic stronghold. They claimed that city, and it had a demonic oppression on it that, brother, at times it was nearby impossible to pray. And you come back to the States and you could just feel that difference. A lot of missionaries don't really realize many times the demonic, satanic weight that's on top of everything else. But for us, we could unplug, go away, and just clear our head, and spend time with the family and just lay around and do nothing, and then go back and then dive back in 1,000%. And it worked for us. I didn't really have a set time, Brother Lowry. We didn't have like you said, that stringent. I would just know, okay, I got to stop. I'm too deep into it. I need to back out for a couple of days, spend time with my family. And I did that. We made great memories. My wife and I had a great marriage. Our kids had nobody got bitter. Nobody got neglected. And even to this day, I've been in the ministry all these years, and I'll tell my wife, pack a suitcase. We're going to go take a couple of days and just get away. Something about leaving where you are gives you a fresh perspective. It's like you just clear your head. And I've heard missionaries and pastors brag about it. Well, bless God, I hadn't had a vacation in 10 years. And I just want to say, I love you, but that's just stupid. There's no reason in the world why you can't leave on a Monday and Tuesday, maybe come back in on Wednesday afternoon or not, get somebody to preach for you. Take 2 or 3 days and take care of your family, take care of yourself. If you really want to be in the ministry till you're 70 years old, you got to do it. You have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. How do you structure your days?
Oh my word. I wish I could tell you I had a recommended structure as a pastor. I'm usually in my office every day. I get in my office every morning, and I'm here usually till 3 or 4 o'clock every day. During the school year, I'm usually here by 7:30. During the summer, we usually don't get in here till 8:30 or 9. But I'm here almost every day, most of the day, and people that want to talk to me can come here and talk. I'm working on messages. If I don't have somebody in my office, or if I'm not doing staff meetings or solving problems, I'm usually working on messages, because you got Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, plus I do a Sunday school class. So I've got 4 lessons to get up a week, and that keeps me busy. And I work on books. I'm working on 2 right now. So I guess it just depends on what mood I'm in as to whether I hunker down and invest in that. But I'm home. I'm home by 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'm home, and I'm gonna be with my family for the evening. Eat supper with my family. Eat supper with my wife, and spend the evening with them at home. A lot of times I may be on the phone, or emailing, texting, whatever. Sometimes I'll take my laptop home and work on things at home. But I try to, when I'm home, be home. Yeah. And our people here are real good. They've been trained that, hey, I'm here 50 hours a week. If you need me, try to do it in there. I don't want to pull away at night and go. So another thing too that I've done that I think a lot of younger pastors don't do, but when they get my age, they do. And that is, I really don't do a lot of counseling. I tell people, I preach 3 times a week. If you don't come to church 3 times a week, I'm not really going to want to spend an hour of my week with you, dealing with you one-on-one, if you don't come to church and you don't hear the preaching. And I have found the people that are faithful to church don't need as much counseling as the ones that hit and miss. So just kind of having that policy helps. And I'm not saying there's not times when people don't need you. And if they need you and you know that, obviously I'll unplug and do whatever any time of day or night. But I know pastors that brag about being on call 24/7. People take advantage of that. And I think they create a lot of stress for themselves. They don't have to. I tell people, I say, you take off work to go to the dentist. You take off work to go to the doctor. If your whole life is falling apart, but the only time you can talk to your pastor is 7 o'clock at night after he's already been in the office all day. Maybe we need to rethink this whole thing. So I try to schedule my counseling like after church on Wednesday night or on Sunday night, so that doesn't take me away from my family at night. Yeah, some people may have a problem with that, but it works for me.
Okay, thanks for joining on this podcast. I'm going to stop it right there. I actually have another 45 minutes with Pastor Shiflett. That the question that Brad asks is really the highlight and the purpose behind this podcast. And I hope you come back and listen to the next episode. I'll probably release them back to back. So I just wanted to separate them to give a highlight to the question and the answer that is coming. Pastor Shiflett does an excellent job. He looks at it, he looks at the question, and he answers it from a very biblical way with an example. And it's probably one of the best answers I've heard to the question. And so listen to the next episode, part 2 with Pastor Shiflett, and you'll hear the question and you'll hear the answer. God bless.